Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come over to the northeast here and speak at your beef conference. I'm to be talking on building soil fertility, but I'll probably find it a little bit easier to actually just tell a little bit of our story and where we've come from in the last 12 years. And I think that will, and then I'll certainly get into some of the chemistry of how we've done it. What you're seeing on the screen there is an aggregation of about 5 properties which have all been purchased in the last 12 years basically. So I suppose I'll just say something else. I'm not an agronomist. I'm just a farmer that's had a strong interest in soils. And that's been something that's been with me for a long time. And when I did my Nuffield Scholarship, I did it on alternative sources of nutrient for pasture and cropping. So that was a topic that was very passionate to myself. I was born in South Gippsland, born and bred down there, and was part of a family partnership. And worked with my brother and parents for 22 years in a family partnership in South Gippsland. Before we actually then purchased a 250 hectare property in East Gippsland in 2000. And that was really just actually a purchase to allow us somewhere to get some cattle out of wet South Gippsland country through the winter months and get them into a drier environment. And that was the actual property right at the bottom down there, which is the original Kintore property. So 2000 we purchased that property. We're still running all of our country in South Gippsland. I had the opportunity to do a Nuffield Scholarship in 2002, and I come back from doing my Nuffield Scholarship and sat down with the rest of the family and said, I think that East Gippsland country we've got has got a lot more potential in it than just being a little bit of dry land country to pop winter cattle on through the winter months. I think we should actually start looking at developing some of that country and expanding the operation up there and seeing whether we could actually start growing some cereals in that environment as well, because there'd actually traditionally not been cereals grown in East Gippsland, but there's a large market, feed market for wheat. The rest of the family said to me, I don't think that sounds like much of an idea, I think you're going to send us broke. And my wife and I said, well, perhaps this might be a good time to dissolve the family partnership. So in 2004, we dissolved our family partnership, and my wife and I and our 3 children shifted to East Gippsland and started on this journey. When we first got to East Gippsland, we had all the issues of we didn't have scale of economy, fairly small business with only the 250 hectares there. So we actually just went off and we leased about 1,000 hectares up near Swifts Creek. Just dry land breeding country, pretty raw country. And we actually used that to build our livestock numbers. So we actually started building our breeding herd of cows, and that was a good move for us, because what it actually allowed us to do was to build numbers within our livestock enterprise. And then as we had started to have some adjoining properties coming on the market beside us there at Bairnsdale, and we started purchasing adjoining properties to make up that aggregation of 5 properties, we actually started to slowly let some of the lease country go, but we already had stock to stock the new places that we were purchasing. So that gave us the support of the banks, even though we had very low equity. So what you're seeing there now is basically Kintore as it is, but I'll give you a little bit of the history of where we come from. So we run basically a composite breeding herd. It was great to hear Tom tell the Hicks story there a minute ago. We've got genetics that some of them go back to there. Run about 500 breeding cows, calving July, August, trying to fit into that feed pattern that we're hearing about this morning. And the bulk of the progeny are all fattened on property. So we're either fattening it, if we decide that we can't fatten them, we'll actually just grow them out and sell them into the feedlot market. But heifers are always fattened. We never sell a store heifer. We think selling store heifers is just giving away profit to someone else. So they're always fattened. Run a stocking rate of about 18 DSE to the hectare, and we also grow 500 to 600 hectares of cereal crops. Heifers calve at 24 months of age. We've had issues with calving heifers. About 5 years ago, we got to the point that I feel that we were probably assisting 25% of our heifers calving. It was just driving us crazy. Got to the stage where I said to Karen, we're never going to calve another heifer in our life. And started doing some research and spoke to a chap who runs a lot of cattle down in South Gippsland, and he'd actually been using Angus low liner bulls for calving his heifers. So we thought, well, we'll give it a go, and we actually went and leased 3 low liner bulls for the first season rather than buying them because we weren't sure. We've used them now for 4 years in a row. We calve in excess of 100 heifers every year, and I can honestly say to you, I have not pulled a calf in 4 years from a heifer. They just spit out little calves, about 28 to 30 kilos. They're black, and everyone says, well, what do they look like 12 months later? That's what they look like 12 months later. Those little calves there at the moment are on a little bit of a feed ration, so they're getting a couple of kilos of corn in a ration. They'll be fat in another 6 weeks or so, and they'll be about 350, 360 kilos live weight. So to us, it's been just basically life-changing to the business to be able to calve big mobs of heifers down. Karen and I went to New Zealand there a couple of weeks ago, and the heifers are calving. We just said, no, they'll be right. Come home. Just lots more calves on the ground was all there was when we got home. Grass fattening is something that we've certainly embraced in the last couple of years with the markets there that are now for grass fattened cattle. So we've been working with Coles, and we started supplying Coles last August when they introduced their Greys line of beef. I think we're in the first week of kill, and that's been very good to us. I must just go back a little bit. Those progeny that come from those heifers from the low liners, 100% of them straight to the abattoir once they're fat. It's purely a terminal operation. We don't want to risk those genetics getting into our breeding herd. Sort of that's fairly typical of a turn-off grass-fattened animal of ours. Sort of looking to turn them off at about 14 months of age, about 250 kilos dressed weight. To get them there, they sort of can't have a bad day in their life. From the day they drop on the ground, we don't feed the cows particularly well at the moment while they're calving, because we sort of say it takes the first 6 weeks or so for the calf to get big enough to be able to really utilise that milk, but then we'll really chuff the feed in after that. Something that we have as a little bit of a sideline, Bairnsdale actually has quite a large vegetable growing industry on the Lindenow Flats. And there's a processing plant in Bairnsdale called One Harvest. They process about 40 tonne of vegetables a day. We hold the contract to cart all the waste vegetables out of there. So we cart about 6 tonne of waste vegetables every day from that processing plant. About 360, 359, 360 days of the year. They don't work Christmas Day and they don't work Good Friday. And that's a product that we've been able to utilise to really give us the ability to have a product that we can mix different feedstuffs with and actually turn into a product that can either be good for fattening animals, it could be good for a maintenance ration. It's been quite valuable to us. That product come to us quite by chance, but yeah, look, the arrangement is as long as we have a truck there to keep carting it out on a daily basis, committed to them, and don't cause them any grief, they just keep giving it to us. Yeah, look, as a full-time guy that sort of looks after the cattle side of the operation, his day starts with hopping in that little truck and he goes and picks that load up. It's only 12 k's into town, brings it home, makes a feed ration, makes sometimes a couple of feed rations up for the different classes of stock we're feeding, and then sort of probably feeds a bit of silage, and then he'll be finished up by 11 o'clock and on to some other jobs after that. That's a Keenan mixer wagon that we put it through, and yeah, so it does quite a good job. When we are having to feed lots of cattle, that's sort of pretty much what it looks like. We still actually like to give our cattle pasture while we're actually giving them a feed ration. So we use lots of waste not self-feeders and basically mix our vegetables with some grain and whatever other supplements we need. We'll set up these feeders in our laneway systems where cattle actually can ad lib, come out, eat out of the feeder and back out into the pasture and still have a nip and still actually be rotationally grazing as they're actually on that feed ration. So they're working their way around. We grow grain to develop properties, is why we grow grain, because all of the properties that we've bought over the last 12 years have basically been very undeveloped, full of red gum stumps, full of tussocks, and there's a slide in the middle. So we have a grain growing operation to develop properties, basically. The grain we grow is predominantly red wheats, and they are sown as early as we can in the autumn, so quite often about the middle of March, and we'll actually be grazing steers on those red wheat crops by the middle of May, and we'll graze them through till the end of July and then lock them up to get a wheat crop. So likes of that paddock that's being harvested at the moment, it would have grazed young weaner steers for a good 2 months, and then we would have harvested 4.5, 5 tonne of wheat to the hectare off it at the end. So we believe we can recoup all of our establishment costs of growing a wheat crop from the grazing phase and then pure profit out of the grain phase. The grain we do grow is all sold to dairy farmers. So we have storage for about 2,500 tonne of grain, and we feed that into 4 dairy farms 12 months of the year. So we have basically long-term arrangements with these dairy farms, feed grain into them on one takes a load every 10 days, others are sort of every 3 weeks or so. And we do that a little bit differently in the respect that we actually sit down with the grain farmers the dairy farmers at the start of the year, and we actually sell it to them on a fixed price basis. So we are on a set price from the start of the season all the way through the season. I know what I'm getting. As dairy farmers, they know exactly what they're paying. They've embraced it amazingly well because they can now sit down with their bank managers, do proper budgets on what their feed costs are going to be, and it has worked well. Yes, at the start of the year, do we have a way of establishing that pricing network? That pricing is actually established from what the average Melbourne price for the last 3 years has been, plus $30 a tonne. So all we're interested in is the average historic price of grain. We're not chasing the highs, we definitely don't want the lows. So we say Melbourne price, it's very easy to get the figures on what the average has been for the last 3 years there. Then it's going to cost $30 a tonne for that dairy farmer to get it from Melbourne through to Gippsland. So we'll take that, thanks. And that's how we establish. So it's been good business for us, yeah. In 2004, when we first started developing properties, that's pretty much what they all looked like. And every property that we've bought over the last 10 years has looked just like that. Do a soil test on them. They'll have an Olsen between 2 and 4. The very first soil test we ever did, the agronomist sent them off to be retested because he said, I don't believe they can be that low. They were. Covered in onion weed, which when you've got onion weed, you just know you're very low in phosphorus. Flatweed, tussocks, and just poor drainage all the way through. Little swampy areas all through the paddocks. So the first role is always bring the excavator in, de-stump the country, do a lot of picking up of broken up red gum timber and such. And then basically heavy cultivation, levelling, put some drains in through the places, and we've done a lot of it, and we've got a lot of machinery to do it now, and so it's become a lot easier than what it was back in 2004. What we initially started doing was we decided that we should put all the country into raised beds because it was wet country. And that was the first 400-acre block that we developed, and we put it into raised beds. And we'd had a big east coast low come in, dumped about 130 mil of rain on us in about 24 hours. That was just planted to wheat, and we thought, well, that'll possibly won't survive. But amazingly, with the drainage, like 2 months later, dried out well and the wheat survived. And we were doing a bit of fattening of lambs there at that stage. But one thing that we very much come to the conclusion was that the bulk of the benefits from the raised beds was actually all of this drainage networks that we were putting in through the fields to actually get that water to move. And so now we've actually gone away from raised beds. We just do a lot of work with surface drains. So when I say surface drains, fairly wide drains put in with an earth-moving scraper that you can actually spray through, you can sow through, but they actually keep the water moving. We find that a crop will survive when it's extremely wet as long as the water's moving. But if the water stagnates and pools, the crop won't survive. But interestingly, and I'm just getting onto the soils now, once we went through the process of deep ripping country and then to put beds in, we started to really change the whole soil profile. Go over here to where it's never been cultivated, and we'd call it the control. Probably only got 3 inches or so of topsoil with any real colour in it. And we sort of go into a sodic-y, we call it sodic spew layer basically. When it's wet, it is just pure soup. When it's dry, it just sets like concrete. And then we've got our nice yellow friable clay underneath. But the country that we'd put into beds and the deep ripping that had gone on, we'd actually lifted some of this clay up into that sodic-y layer and allowed actually probably some of the topsoil to migrate its way down through. And now, 10 years later, this is our best country. And we're seriously now looking at building a clay delving machine, because we think we'll probably start doing some clay delving where we're deliberately bringing some of this clay up and trying to mix with our topsoils and try and get this happening over a larger area. Because this is not a good scenario. Root systems just come down and they get into this zone here, and it's a terrible zone for a root system to try and grow through. Whereas this over here, our moisture meters that we have spread across our property are telling us that they're set up in 10 centimetre increments down to a metre deep, that when we do this, we're actually getting wheat crops harvesting moisture down to a metre deep. So we're actually getting root systems that are penetrating all the way through, which is like if you can harvest that moisture down deep, that'll be sometimes what'll get you through a spring and give you a crop, compared to getting a great heap of pinched up chook feed at the end of the year as grown. That would have been deep ripped only probably about 18 inches deep. So we were really just getting into, that's 12 inches. So we're well into the clay, yeah. But an old guy said to me one time when we were talking about this, I said, I'm concerned that the clay is no good. He said, well, do your dam banks grow grass? And I said, yeah, they do. And he said, well, your clay's all right. Because he said, if you're in country and you drive around everywhere and the dam banks haven't got any grass on them, you've probably got a hostile clay. But if your dam banks grow grass, your clay's probably... Okay, we better go on to some fertiliser. Look, calcium. We actually consider calcium is the king of all fertility for actually building soil fertility. If you don't get your calcium levels right within your soils, you actually won't get phosphorus, potash and all your other elements to actually hold. So we've put about 5 tonne to the hectare now on all of our country, and we really what we're aiming for is when you actually start doing some soil testing and you're looking at the cation exchange capacity of your country, sometimes you'll get these graphs come back and they'll tell you how much magnesium and how much calcium and such is in your country. When we start, we've got about 40% calcium, 20 of magnesium, and a little bit of potash, and mainly sodium and hydrogen and others in the rest. But this is what you really need. If you can get your soils to that point where you've got about that 68% calcium and back to 12 of magnesium and about 5 of potash, don't worry about the other elements because they'll just fall into place, because these are the key 3 elements. And when you get your soil balanced to that, it'll actually start to do what soil's meant to do. And when it dries out, it'll actually crack open nicely, it'll breathe, it'll flocculate, and it won't, when it gets wet, all slump together. So we've spent a lot of time trying to get our soils to that point. So basically, when we do get into, after we're starting to get our soils balanced, naturally we're still putting phosphorus and potash on to grow a crop through the growing phase, but we really are concentrating on getting those calcium levels right. And, well, you know, your phosphorus, we're aiming for probably a Olsen P of around 20, or in a Corbel test, probably 50 or so. And you just definitely need that phosphorus to try and get good, strong seedling growth, good root systems. Then your potash, look, we're ideally aiming for about 150 parts per million. Once you get those potash levels up, you actually get stem strength within your plants, so your cereal crops won't fall over like they used to. You certainly get disease resistance. It improves the water use efficiency of that plant enormously once you can get the potash levels up. Helps with green leaf retention, so the plant will actually stay greener for longer into the spring. And the other thing that it does is actually helps eliminate reverse osmosis, which is actually where if a plant is stressed, and especially when a plant's stressed and it's low in potash, it will actually give out moisture out of the plant and out of the root system when you get those drying couple of days in the spring when the season's starting to fail and you get your hot northerly winds. If you've got plants that are very low in potash, they'll actually burn off a lot quicker than plants that have got good potash levels. Sulphur, look, we just consider sulphur is extremely essential because sulphur is such a mobile element that you can have a soil test that will show it to be quite adequate, but 3 months later it will actually be deficient. So whenever we're putting nitrogen on, we're actually always putting some sulphur on with it. You will not get the full bang out of your buck with nitrogen if you don't put some sulphur there. You should have about, for every 10 units of nitrogen you put on, try and put 1 unit of sulphur on. So just remember 10-to-1 ratio. You'll get a lot more benefit out of your nitrogen. Fowl manure, we've used a lot of fowl manure over times to actually just try and build fertility. So we've either have the option we can cart it straight out of poultry sheds, or we can actually sometimes get it stockpiled. Just to give you a few brief run through, if you put about 4 cubic metres per hectare, so say about 2 tonne to the hectare is about what that will convert to, you'll actually be getting about 50 kgs of N, 25 of P and 20 of K, plus a great gauntlet of other elements that are there but all in much smaller quantities. When I was doing my Nuffield Scholarship, I visited Arkansas State University and they've done a huge amount of work on poultry manure over there. And they actually said that from the work they'd done, they'd come to the conclusion that there was as much value, dollar value in poultry manure from the biology that it introduces to your soil as there is from the nutrient value that it introduces to your soil. So it's a great way to actually get some biology going in your soils if you're struggling for it. Right, I'm sorry this gets a little bit busy, but this is some trials that we've had going on at home through Southern Farming Systems. It's 3-year replicated trials. And this is a barley crop that was grown on it for the first year. So 2.5 tonne of chicken, litre 5, 10, 20. Then we go into composts, which is a compost product which is actually comes from south of Sale at an operation down there called Dutson Downs at the same rates. And then basically at the bottom, no fertiliser, only just a planting starter, so like 100 kgs of MOP. That's the yields in tonnes per hectare on a very late August planting with all these different elements. Not a great yield response when you look at all the way up to 20 tonne to the hectare of chicken manure. It did very little more than your 2.5 tonne. Then the next line is actually where we added 10 kilos of copper sulphate, 10 kilos of zinc sulphate, and 10 kilos of manganese sulphate to the soil. Because we had become very frustrated in our area because we knew that we were deficient in those elements, but we're continuing to get advice which was saying put on half a kilo of copper sulphate on 2 kilos of zinc and you'll be right. And I'd actually attended an agronomy course through Neil Kinsey from America, and we went through some soil tests one evening, and actually Neil said, you know, you need about 20 kilos of copper sulphate to sort your problems out. And I said, well, 20 kilos seems like an enormous amount. I come home and I said, I think I'll actually do some trials and I'll pop them on at 10 kilos. So I'll go a half rate, so I didn't want to overdo it. But the interesting thing is, look at the yield response when you actually add the trace elements into it. We basically achieved about a 30% yield response across everything. But when you actually get down to the bottom where all it had was just a planting mix of MAP, we actually got about a 50% yield increase. We spent $72 a hectare, and on average we gained $180 a hectare in yield response. So we've gone now and done about 800 hectares with that mix of trace elements, and we're doing more soil testing at the moment, and we'll come back with another 10 kilos, and that'll get us up to about the right levels. The improvement in stock health has been enormous, and the weight gains and the doing ability of the cattle that we're growing out, it's solved so many issues there. You just don't find an Angus calf now with those bits of off-coloured hair around his side. You don't find your Herefordy calves that have sort of gone half yellow. It has. It's really changed things.
When did you apply that?
That was all applied, actually, just spun on with spreader trucks, and we now applied in the dry of the autumn. So we'll just spin it on through summer, and we mix the copper, the zinc and the manganese together and set the spreader trucks at 30 kilos to the hectare and just go out and just spread all day basically at 30 kilos to hectare. It'll only throw about 15 metres, so you've got to drive pretty closely together to try and get an even spread. But it's been a real game changer in our district though.
Are you going to have to keep doing it, or do you reckon we'll get it up in
No. From the work that we've seen out of the States, if you get your trace elements to about where they need to be, it'll probably be your grandchildren that'll be doing it next time around. Because they deplete over such a long period of time that if you actually get them up there, you'll be pretty right. Look, on our pastures and our cereal crops, we're great advocates of multiple applications. Just popped another 100 kilos to the hectare of a mix on the other day on our pastures. Probably be 50 kilos of urea and another 50 kilos of 2-in-1 type mix. Just when you actually have an environment can get very wet like ours can, the leaching can be an issue. So we'll probably pop 3 applications on through the year. The only real elements that we believe you cannot build in reserve in the soil because they are so mobile is nitrogen, sulphur and boron. So just remember those 3 elements. You will always have to be reapplying them basically. Once we get to November and our season is cut out quite often, we're great fans of actually just direct drilling straight in, just all sorts of different, whether it's millet and rape mixed together or multi-species crops, anything to actually see whether we can utilise moisture when we actually get a dump through the summer. Because inevitably somewhere through summer you get a rain, and it's normally at the most inconvenient time, and you can be sure that if you've got harvest coming up, we're going to get rain. So we reckon in November, go and pop some direct drill, some summer crops in. When it happens for us, that's about what it looks like 90 days later. So that's millet and rape, and we do about 300 hectares a year like that at home. That is our standing haystack. So because we run a relatively high stocking rate on some fairly light soils, we can actually build a real standing haystack and actually have it then for grazing off all through February and March. Last year we did multi-species. We did forage, sorghum, millets, rapes, turnips, arrowleaf clovers, cowpeas and lab, all in the same mix. Drop your whole sowing rate to about 1/10 of what you'd normally put in for each of them if you're putting them individually. You get a huge benefit from complementary activities between different plants growing side by side. You got different root systems. You got some with bulbs under them, some with fibrous root systems underneath. And just always remember that if you got something like millet and sorghum in there, you're actually creating an ideal zone for mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizal fungi is actually fungi within the soil which actually gives you an ability to harvest natural fertility out of the soil, and it will actually also give fertiliser that you put on 6 months later a greater ability to actually activate and work. But certain plants actually excrete the right environment for mycorrhizal fungi to thrive. So making it all come together. Oh look, we just reckon it's a combination. It's got to be fun. If you're not having fun in the job, get out and let someone else do it. It's got to be family. Got to be, I'm very fortunate they enjoy the operation. We've got great staff. Life is good, just like that little calf there. He's pretty sure Mum's going to be back in another half an hour for give him another feed. And I just say, well, the good Lord gives you air in your lungs to keep farming. Just keep enjoying it. So thank you. And sorry we went late.